So my favorite quote from Language of Listening says, imagine not having to defend your intentions. The world feels like a much safer place around someone who can see your true intentions. And that's life-changing too.
Unleash the untapped potential within you as we dive fearlessly into the realms of healing, personal growth, self-love, and uncharted territories of the human experience. Join us as we navigate relationships, conquer career and business milestones, and explore the depths of spirituality. This isn't just a podcast, it's a manifesto for the resilient, the ambitious, the soul-searching women and men of today. Grab your coffee and let's dive in with Beyond the Surface. Welcome back to another episode here on Beyond the Surface, and today I am joined by Rosemary Clark. I am so honored and excited to have you here. Thank you so much for being here, for diving in conversation with me today. We were already kind of going through some things, so I think this is going to be a very beautifully aligned in ways conversation. So I'm honored that you're here. Thank you, Rosemary.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Of course. So I want to dive in. You know, you have first and foremost, I want to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself. But, you know, for those that are tuning in, you have this journey and this story to share around burnout, which I feel like is something that we can all relate to, but not just burnout. It's like unpacking where this burnout came from. So I'd love for you to just share a little bit of who you are before we actually dive into all the things.
Okay, yeah, sure. So, my name is Rosemary Clark. I'm a mom to 2 kids, and I'm a language of listening parenting coach. This is what I do with my life. I was telling you, Ashley, and I recently went back to school as well, my master's degree, so that I can help my clients further by, becoming a registered psychotherapist. But this kind of did start with my burnout, like you said. So I burned out in my early 30s. I just gotten married. I was about 10 weeks into my marriage and crying, before the 10 weeks even hit, I was crying every day coming home from work. My husband knew my boss. He had a chat with him and it's just like, there's something not okay with Rose, and my boss is like, no, she's fine. She's fine. But my doctor took me off work and she said, look, listen, you need a break. And then she said, look, I'm going to offer you meds or therapy or both. What do you want to go for? And I said, let's go for the therapy. And so my therapist, of course, the fact that I came to therapy because of burnout, she's like, well, why are you working so hard? Why are you working so much? And, the phrase that kind of bubbled up in me was, I'm just trying to prove that I'm worth the space I take up in the world. This was the root that we started to get to. And that answer surprised me. I didn't know that that's what I was doing. It was not in my conscious thinking, but there was this drive in me, and over the next number of weeks, she, as we spoke, she started to say to me like, Rosemary, you actually had a highly abusive childhood, a seriously abusive childhood, mentally, physically, emotionally. And I was like, oh, I knew I didn't like my childhood. I didn't realize it was abuse because you don't know. You don't know, and this is the world that you're born into. This is your experience, And so, funnily enough, before I got married to my husband, the conversation that we had was around parenting and what kind of parents I wanted to be. And I was hoping for my children. He was fully on board. He fully agreed. The issue was that when I had 2 babies under 2, and I started yelling because I was completely overwhelmed, completely emotionally, mentally overwhelmed, I knew there was a problem. I was not okay with yelling at my kids. They were babies. I would lay awake at night. It's hard enough to sleep anyways when you have little kids that you have to get up and feed and, tend to their nightmares and whatnot. But I also couldn't sleep because I was just racked with guilt, with just this like, what did I do? What is there even to yell at, And so I was very unsettled in myself and in my role as a mom. And to me, this was like so important. I wanted to give these little people such a beautiful start to their lives. And it was not looking very beautiful. So I started to look. for tools. I told my husband, I said, I need tools. I had the ideas, the ideas I had in my head, I was happy with them. They were great, but I didn't have the tools to have those things live out, to be able to live them out in my life. So I started looking, I started reading all the books and all the blog posts and things would work for a day or two, but then they would just fall back to the way that they were until I stumbled upon Language of Listening. And Language of Listening was so different. I found it because a lady I was following online the way that she spoke about her daughters was so beautiful. Like I was like, how does your brain work like that, to think about your children that way, to see your children in those beautiful ways? That's the way I want my brain to work. And then she mentioned this lady named Sandy Blackard. And I was like, who's this Sandy Blackard in this language of listening, you know? So I went to look, and it was everything that I had hoped for and more. So really the way that this parenting model works is that it teaches you as a parent how to draw out your children's strengths so that they have access to those parts of themselves on their good days and their bad days too. So they have access to the best parts of themselves on their worst days, really. And then also it taught me how to hold boundaries in a way that wasn't mean and controlling, because that's the way I was holding boundaries. No, you can't hit your sister. Yes, we have to get out the door at a certain time, right? When my kids weren't able to do those things, I would freak out. And so being able to learn how to hold boundaries in a way that left me feeling empowered and left my kids feeling empowered and left us feeling closer to each other instead of like enemies, that was like everything to me. The tools are simple. There's only 3 of them, and they work kind of like magic. And but the basis behind them is totally scientific, based on something called child-parent relationship therapy, which is just a beautiful, beautiful, type of therapy as well.
Yeah. Ooh, I really want to unpack and share more of the language of listening. Before we dive there, I do want to mention, one of the things that we talked about before we kind of hit record was just that you mentioned how you and your husband had the conversation of parenting before, before getting married. And, we talked about how it's always like have the money conversation. And of course, that is absolutely so important.
Yes.
And hello. And we're also told, do you want to have kids or not? Because that ends up being, could be a deal breaker, right? If you don't want kids and you find that out, like, that's devastating. But what about the parenting conversation? What about how do you view parenting? What are your beliefs around parenting? How do you want to be a parent? That was something I witnessed in you sharing that with me. I'm just like, that was just this beautiful moment of also for me to kind of take away into my relationship as I prepare to get married. I'm like, we've never had the parenting conversation.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's wild.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah. And it makes me even think back to when I was pregnant the first time. I had this stack of pregnancy books, how to get through pregnancy, how to get through labor and delivery. And that's 9 short months. I mean, it's long, but it's short, And then all of a sudden I've got this baby, and I look at my husband and I'm like, none of those books are helping me now. Like, how do I parent this? How do I look after this baby? What about sleep? What about feeding? What about all these things, And even in that moment, I was shocked and, unsure of how to make decisions and whatnot. So I felt very silly that I'd spent so much time in these pregnancy books that
it's not meant to be how it's supposed to be. Yeah.
The rest of my life, I'm a parent,
Yeah, it's right. Like, and probably, I mean, I don't know. I feel like I can't compare pregnancy or labor, because obviously I haven't been there yet, but sometimes we go through a physical pain and we kind of like forget what that even feels like. And clearly, I mean, if it was so terrible, there wouldn't be second babies. So, I mean, it's true to what you said about, we forget about how the labor goes, and unless of course, it's very traumatic. I would never want to take that away. Yeah. But no. You're parenting for the rest of your life when you bring someone into this world. And you also have to navigate all these different stages, right? There's, of course, the baby, and making sure that your role is making sure this baby is alive and staying alive, right? And you're the protector. And then they move into other stages of life, and you become a different role in their life too. On that, I'm curious, like, did you have any fears when it came to motherhood?
I don't think I did. I mean, the only fear I really had was that I might potentially create the same experience for my kids that was given to me. And that was really what I wanted to make sure didn't happen. I did not want them to have that same experience. And I think that experience was taking away, my sense of identity and taking away my sense of value and worth. those things, so I never wanted that to happen to my kids. And as we talked about before, I mentioned what were the things I talked with my husband about, when it came to parenting. And it was just two things I wanted, which was I wanted my kids to be able to have their own thoughts, feelings, and opinions. I wanted them to be able to have their own identity and be their own person. And I also wanted to be there for them as parents. I wanted to have a close emotional attachment with them, and that felt easy. Can I just say, Ashley Ann, that felt easy when I just had one baby. Because I had learned in my childhood to fully give myself away and give myself up and be this other identity that would keep me from being abused as frequently as a child, right? So to be that perfect little golden child for my parents so that I could stay in line and not get in trouble. And then when I became a mom to just one baby, it was like, now I can fully give away my identity to this idea of motherhood and fully just be engaged with this one little person and be everything for them. And that was fine. It's like I said, once I had two, I had another child when my daughter was 21 months old. My second daughter came along. And all of a sudden, this person I had, I'd become and given myself fully to this baby. Now I had two babies I had to give myself fully to, and I couldn't. I'm not two people. I'm just one person. Yeah. And that's when the stress really hit, and I didn't know what to do with myself. Yeah.
So in that kind of continuing with that, like, how did you navigate that period and that time? Because you knew about the language of listening before, or no, this still came after. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Interesting. So how were you navigating that now, two babies?
Terribly. Really, I was navigating it terribly. And so, sadly, we had actually moved back and closer to my family. And I still didn't really understand the level of toxicity that was there. And so that toxicity was kind of woven into, this, when the second child was born, and it didn't have support from them. And didn't have any friends left over from high school or anything that were still living in the area. Like I had no support system except for my husband, and he had no support system because he didn't grow up there. He grew up, halfway across Canada. And so we were very much alone. And so we really were depending on each other, but it was difficult because we were still fairly new in our marriage. And we were just trying to figure life out, and so we were not managing well. At all. It was very, very difficult. And so this is why, I turned to books and the internet and whatnot. Because I knew I couldn't turn to my own mom for parenting advice. I was just going to I knew her parenting, strategies very, very well. I experienced it, and I have, 5 siblings. So I watched it, with also, with the siblings that I had, seeing them get parented as well. And so, so I was not managing well. There were sleepless nights, like I said, and there were, moments where I was really, of course, loving being a mother. But it was just this, when I would find myself experiencing these moments of being out of control and not recognizing myself and not recognizing what I wanted to be, who I wanted to be in those moments,
Yeah. And so how did things change once you found language of listening? How did, obviously it wasn't an overnight thing too, but like, what was that navigating looking like once you found it and you're starting to integrate these new tools, which I'm sure, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, were probably very different from what you experienced as a child. So it's this like whole learning of a whole new way.
You've got it. Yes. Yeah. Excuse me. So obviously, as you're growing up, your brain is learning things, right? It's laying out mental pathways. And so the mental pathways, like you say, for these tools that I found, they just didn't exist. I tell you, I went through a couple years of just mental gymnastics, trying to learn these brand new ways. Or sometimes the way I explain it to my clients is like, imagine, you've got a jungle and you're told that you have to build a highway through that jungle. Right. Because that's really what our brain is, right? Is like, there's this jungle in there and there's roads already that are laid out, but you don't like your life going down those roads. And so you need to create new roads in the jungly part where there is no road, to head in the direction that you want to go in. So, I mean, the beautiful thing about language of listening is it's set up just so wonderfully to rewire our brains. So the way it's set up is there's these 3 beautiful tools. And with each one of the tools, there's a belief, there's a premise, right? And so it's like that belief is really where the parenting comes from, where language of listening comes from, is those beliefs. So, and I'll just go through the 3 of them. The first one is everything children do and say is communication, and they must continue to communicate until they are heard. And so that's the first thing, is just, we can stop taking things personally. We can stop feeling like my child is doing this, it means I'm a bad parent. And we can just go, oh, like, look at them. They're trying to communicate something. They don't have all the words. They don't have all the life experience, right? And so there's something that they're communicating in this behavior. The second premise says that children have every possible inner strength, and they act according to who they believe they are. And so we can look at our kids and go, okay, I know that they have the potential to have any strength that exists. They do have that strength. And whatever they believe about themselves is how they're going to behave. It's how they're going to act. And so if I can get them to believe the good things about themselves that exist in them, they're going to start to act that way. And I'll tell you a quick little story to explain that. Because when I first started learning language of listening, because this is what we're kind of talking about too, is how did you get started in it, right? So when I first started, I wanted to start with this idea of bringing out these strengths in my children. And so my youngest was 3. And I just decided I would just pick one strength to notice in her and point out to her. And so I decided helpful was a great one to say to a 3-year-old, you know? And so I was sitting at the dining room table and I just said, you know, hey, Emily, could you get me a butter knife from the kitchen, please? So she went and got me a butter knife and she brought it back. And in my head, I went through the steps of language of listening. First is say what you see. And so saying what I saw was, you brought me a butter knife when I asked. That's it. Just very, very simple, especially for a 3-year-old. They love it when you give them that sports game kind of play-by-play. So you brought me a butter knife when I asked. And then I named the strength. I said, that shows you're helpful. So she was kind of happy with that, whatever. 2 more times that day, I did the say what you see, pointed out that she was helpful, whatever she did. And so after I'd done it 3 times, she said, Mommy, you keep saying that. And I said, well, yeah, it's just something I'm noticing about you today. Like, you know, how helpful you are. The 4th time I named that strength in her that day. Now, remember, she's just 3. Okay. She grabs a chair in the kitchen and drags it across over to the kitchen sink. And she said, Mama, whenever you're sick, I'm going to help. And I'm going to help right now by washing the dishes. It's like, what? But this is how people work. This is how kids work, but it's how we all work. Yeah. When you start naming those strengths in your children and pointing them out and giving them the proof that it lives in them. Like I said, you're helpful. You know, you brought me a butter knife. That's a thing you did. That shows you're helpful, you know. What happens in our kids when we start naming the strengths is that they want to start creating situations where they can experience that strength in themselves. Yeah. And so that's what she did. She created a situation. She decided she was going to wash the dishes. This is giving our children access to those parts of themselves. And it's giving them the opportunity to meet their need for power, to feel really capable. That's what the need for power is all about. And actually the needs are what the last belief is about, the last belief from language of listening, the last premise. And it says that all behaviors are driven by 3 healthy needs: experience, connection, and power. And what kids are doing is already meeting their needs. So that second part about kids already meeting their needs, our kids are they're already meeting their needs. We don't have to be 100% there for them, the way that I was losing my identity, you know, with my first child. I thought that that's just what I had to do, was always give my identity away to other people instead of knowing who I truly was, you know. And just a little aside here, if you don't know who you are, if you don't know yourself and trust yourself, you can't hold healthy boundaries, by the way. Okay.
Yeah.
And so, you know, that idea of like, my child is actually already meeting their needs, but it's my job to create the box, to create the playpen for them to meet their needs in, so safely, for them to meet their needs safely. And really meeting their needs is about them meeting them in ways that are personally beneficial, that actually feel satisfying to them, but also socially beneficial. That's part of safety too. Right? It's not just like, don't run out in the road. That's a really important boundary, or, you know, that's not a good way to meet your need, is to run out in the road and play with toys in the road, right? It's to stay in the yard, like, you know, play with your toys over here. But that idea of, you know, being able to meet your needs in a way that's really going to benefit your relationships, that's super, super important too. And then to go back to the first part of that premise, which is so beautiful and really connects us back to the first one, all behaviors are driven by 3 healthy needs. Right? All behaviors, everything your child does is simply trying to meet a need, a healthy need. Doesn't mean that all behaviors are healthy. Doesn't mean that all behaviors fall inside your boundaries as the parent, because you're still the parent and you need to have boundaries in order for that child to be healthy. Right. But we can just see that they always have a good intention. And that's the part of language of listening that I think really, really changed me and settled on my soul in a way that just brought tears to my eyes. So my favorite quote from language of listening says, imagine not having to defend your intentions. The world feels like a much safer place around someone who can see your true intentions. And that's life-changing too.
For not just for a child, but like as an adult, to feel that,
Yeah.
to know that.
You're just trying to meet needs. That's it. That's it.
Yeah.
And maybe there's a better way to meet your need, a way that's going to be more satisfying, that you can feel proud of for
Yeah.
yourself, and then also passing that on to your kids.
Yeah. The question that's coming up, and I kind of am doing this in a way of just like seeing other sides to it. Almost, I don't want to say devil's advocate, but I'm curious on your
Go
take
for it.
of like,
Yeah.
when, for example, you notice this in your daughter, this story that you shared about noticing and calling her out on being helpful. And I guess first and foremost, like it's like I think about when, for example, she might go to school and might not be seen and acknowledged for maybe that same thing or for something else, and how that could also impact, good or bad. Like, does that in any way, shape, or form, right? Because I think about your journey and your story of your childhood, and how the root was you want to be like prove yourself and receive that love from your parents. And it's like, do we then start doing this from a place of like wanting this reassurance that, hey, look at me, I'm really helpful? Yeah, that's kind of the question that was starting to come up in my
Okay.
brain. I'm curious your take and your perspective on this.
Okay. I love this question. I love this question
Okay.
100%. So, first off, I will say many parents, everybody wants their kids to feel good about themselves, right? This is like a goal of many, many parents, especially for people like me that didn't end up coming out of childhood feeling good about themselves, didn't feel good about themselves even in childhood, right? And so we want that for our kids. So many, many parents, what they're doing today is they're doing a lot of good girl, good boy. I'm so proud
Mm-hmm.
of you, right? This praise. This is what a lot of
Yeah.
people are doing. Sadly, praise is not very effective. Praise is what's going to get you the behavior you're wondering about. Going to school, does this person think I'm helpful? Kind of like a little lost puppy dog or a hungry puppy dog, right? Gimme, gimme,
Mm,
gimme. You know, what's different about language of listening is that part that I told you where we start with say what you see and we give the proof that's in the child. It's not my opinion that she brought me a butter knife. It's fact. She
right.
brought me a butter knife when I asked. That was a thing that she did that shows she's helpful.
Yeah.
So that gets rooted inside the child so that no matter who they're with, they
Mm,
know who they are. No matter how they're
mm,
treated, they know who they are. The way that I like to talk about it is I like to tell people imagine that they've got a fountain on the inside of themselves,
yeah.
this wonderful water fountain, that whenever we're thirsty, whenever we've got that question, am I good enough? Am I lovable? Am I capable? All those questions, right, that we tend to have about ourselves, right? That we can go to that fountain on the inside and fill up that empty cup and quench that thirst and know, yes, I'm lovable. I can know that I know that I know inside of myself, right? For people like me, whose parents didn't prime the pump of that fountain, whose fountain is
Right.
barely bubbling anything out. We're all going around with empty cups going to other people. Am I lovable? Fill me up. Am I good enough? And what do? We form ourselves according to what the other person wants instead of being who we truly are, instead of being our authentic self. So when you use this strengths tool with your kids, and remember how simple it is, say what you see
Mm-hmm.
and you name the strength. It's so basic. Really, it
Yeah.
is, right? It's so basic. And yet you're forming their self-talk. You're forming their self-belief. I had a client that came to me and she was so excited because this is like one of my favorite parts of language of listening is when my clients come to me and they say, my child is now using this language. So
Oh,
this mom came to me and um, she said, Rosemary, my daughter came to me the other day and she said, I cleaned my desk. That shows I'm responsible. This is the way this little girl talks to herself and thinks about herself. And I don't think we always realize the weight that we have as parents, that we're actually teaching our children how to view themselves, how to judge themselves, how to speak to themselves. And we can give them the gift of having access to the best parts of themselves, the strongest, most capable, most brave, most responsible, most whatever strength you want to put in
yeah.
there. We can give them access because they can't see or know those things about themselves until we see those things first. And we treat them according to those things. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you believe your
Yeah.
child's going to become a bully, if you think you have an irresponsible child, you're going to basically brainwash them into thinking that that's who they are. And remember, language
Mm-hmm.
of listening says that children act according to who they believe they are, right? Your child will continue to be irresponsible if you tell them that that's who they are. They're going to continue to be a bully if that's what you tell them who they are. But if you show them, you know how to be a caring big sister, big brother, right? You know how to look out for other people. You know how to stand up for yourself or speak up for yourself,
Yeah.
right? And I mean, a good example there about, acknowledging that strength in your child, that they know how to speak up to themselves. Imagine your child talks back to you and your brain tells you, because of your childhood, right? Oh, that's rude. My child can't be like that. Right. And I have to crush this. I have to stop this behavior. You don't actually. What you want to do is you just want to shift it, because there's that strength in there. We talk about hidden strengths in language of listening. There's a hidden strength in there. If your child's talking back to you, they actually know how to speak up for themselves, and they know what they want.
I know.
And they're confident in those things.
Everything is perspective, right?
It really is. And at the same time, see, people think if they think that, then they can't hold a boundary around it. You darn well can hold a boundary around your child speaking rudely to you. But when you find the strength in there, the hidden strength, and you're like, wow, you really know what you want in this situation. You know how to speak up for yourself. And when you speak to me like that, I don't like it. I don't like being spoken to in a rude way. Must be another way you can let me know what you want without being rude. Right? So you allow them to hold on to their identity. You allow them to hold on to what they want, and you still hold a boundary. There's got to be a way we can talk about this where we're both feeling good. Right? Do we need a break? What do we need in this moment so that we can continue on in a healthy way? Because this is important to you, so it's important to me.
Yeah. Wow. That was literally where I was going to go, is like, how do we have this hold the boundary? And I didn't like the word discipline, like that. I know it's just like engraved as like discipline, right? Like, how do we allow them to be all of who they are? And also, but I guess the word in replacing that is still having the boundary, like, right? Like, not, like we find it. Maybe it's your perspective, like this perspective on like discipline. I don't want to use that word. I don't know what the word to replace that is, but right, like when that piece around perspective, right? They're speaking up for themselves in this moment, but the way in which those words are being transmuted and coming out may not necessarily be the greatest.
Yeah. And I mean, if you think ahead, if you can teach them now when they're 6, 7, 10, how to speak to somebody in a respectful way, even when they're upset with that person, think of how you're preparing them for the future, for speaking to their bosses, for speaking to their partners, right? Like you're giving them life skills. And that's the difference. So what you're talking about, discipline, some people talk about punishment. If we talk about punishment for a minute and really say, okay, what is punishment? Punishment is the belief that you need to do something harmful to your child, or something, to get them to make them afraid of you, to make them fearful, to get them to change their behavior. So ask yourself, do you really believe that? Does your child need to be afraid of you in order to change their behavior? Because I'm here to tell you, absolutely not. The thing is that our brains have never been taught this before. We've never seen it. So the brain wiring isn't there. And you can't just come up with this stuff out of nothing, out of nowhere, right? So again, this is the beautiful part of language of listening, where there's these premises, these beliefs that can really start to rewire our brains. But then there's these simple little tools that we can use, that we can practice that belief over and over and over again until it really has created that new highway through the jungle. Right. So that's the easy way that we respond and react to our kids. And we replace punishment. We just get rid of punishment entirely, which is hard. It feels really, really hard to get rid of punishment, because it's how we've always done things. The thing is you can punish your child, or you can just give them a life skill. You can just teach them the life skill that they need to be healthy in that moment, to be healthy in that situation, right? Giving them access to the best parts of themselves, but also teaching them how to relate well with other people, holding those boundaries, keeping them safe. All those pieces are possible. It's just not, again, something that we've really seen or understood in our society, except for in these hidden little pockets, like with child-parent relationship therapy and language of listening. Because that is the issue with a lot of gentle parenting today. We know this is what parents want. They want to be gentle with their children. They want to acknowledge their children's emotions. They want to really protect their child's identity and their self-worth. The thing is that boundary piece is missing from so many of those gentle parenting models, because they haven't figured it out. They'll say, you just got to acknowledge their emotions. And if they can't behave that day, just try again tomorrow. And it's like, that's not the healthiest way. Our kids need firm boundaries. Otherwise we've gone into the area of neglect, right? And that's as harmful as the act of abuse. We really, really need to be in there with them, giving them these life skills. And if we haven't figured it out for ourselves, because we weren't parented well, and this was a huge piece for me, the
Right.
most incredible part of language of listening for me, and the part that actually allowed me to become the kind of mom I wanted to be, was
Yeah.
when, I took a 2-year training to become a language of listening coach. And at the very end, the last third of the second year, Sandy taught us how to use the tools with ourselves. And I was like,
That's
what? And I started naming my own strengths. And I started doing say what you see for myself. And I started figuring out what are the ways that I can live my life? What are the boundaries I have for myself? How can I live my life in a way that I feel proud of myself when I walk away from a difficult situation?
mm,
And that
yeah.
was like, now I feel like a real adult,
Mm-hmm.
That's what helped me actually grow up, was being able to have
Yeah.
those tools for myself. Yeah.
I feel like yeah, there's definitely been like, right, like we've swung so far to that piece around the gentle parenting. I feel
Yes.
like, it's we've, there's been, as our parents would say, you know, maybe what people would call abuse, right? But the punishment aspect was definitely
Yeah.
like
Even reward and
there,
punishment. Yes. Yeah.
right? Like it was there
Yeah.
in
It teaches
childhood.
fear.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then
It
we've
teaches.
swung so far into the gentle parenting where
Yes.
exactly what you said about, I think this piece around the boundaries is what brings both of these together and creates this beautiful relationship between acknowledging and the gentle parenting and
Yeah.
acknowledging and seeing everything that's underlying of what's happening, and also being able to have that boundary and say, and I think the way that you word it was just so beautifully put. But yeah, like they're having this boundary is like that marry of the two, and this way we can live in both. We don't have to instill fear, and we create actually beautiful relationships with our children. and
Yes.
and isn't that what this is all about, right? Is to have these beautiful relationships with our children, because
Yes.
they are their own human,
Yeah.
period. I've always kind of, this landed for me a couple years ago. I don't remember where I heard it, but that this ownership around children is something that when I heard it, I was like, oh, I really, it's hard. But when you think about it, I guess from this angle of spirituality, we don't own, I don't believe that we own our children. They come into this world. We're just, the role that we're playing is the protector. And
Yeah.
then we navigate into different roles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. Because you don't feel like your parents own you.
Right.
You wouldn't say that your parents own you and they should be able to control your every move at the age and stage that you're at and all
Right.
that, right? You're your own person. You need to be.
100%.
It's not healthy otherwise.
100%.
It's not
The other
healthy.
thing too that I was thinking about earlier too, when we talked, and you kind of brought it back in when you were kind of, I guess in a sense, reparenting yourself and receiving what you didn't receive as a child. But I have compassion and also a little bit of sadness for our parents. I feel like in ways, not necessarily that I would say I had an abusive childhood, but I kind of learned a very similar thing of proving myself and wanting to receive that love specifically from my dad, because he wasn't around. My parents separated when I was very young. So I still adopted that same belief of,
Yep.
and got to a very similar point of burnout. And I was like, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? And what's funny is I was recording an episode just 2 days ago, and this came up. So this must have been this bridge for
Oh,
our conversation. But I went on a walk one day, and I kind of just sat with myself, and I was like, why am I feeling like I have to prove myself? Where's this coming from? And this kind of it just landed, and it was like, your dad, like, because he wasn't around, you feel like you have to do this, check all the boxes, do all the things so that he'll notice you. And when I put the piece, there's so much power when you can fill in the gaps of where this comes from, because I feel like then you have this choice with the awareness. You have this choice of whether or not you want that to be something that you want to continue on, and not that it changes immediately, but you're more of aware. You can actually
yeah.
ask yourself in the moment, why am I doing this? why am I doing this thing? And you can course correct in a sense, in that moment. But I was thinking about this, and I also have so much sadness for when I think about my parents, and I'm like,
Yep.
what they didn't receive, what they
Yes.
felt like, they had to do, and what they didn't receive. And that's a beautiful thing too, to be able to give our parents that love,
Yes.
that they also
That
didn't
belief
receive
in their
as
good
they,
intentions, right, Ashley Ann? That belief
exactly.
in their good intentions. Yes. Yeah. Because I
Yeah.
believe that the healing that we can go through in our generation, it can go back. If our parents are open to
100%.
receiving it, it can go backwards and forwards. And it's so beautiful because our parents truly are doing the best with what they could. Like, so one thing that my mom did actually in a way that she really did put her foot down on abuse,
Mhm.
something that her mom did to her that she swore to herself she would never do to her children. I'm actually really, really thankful that she did this, and grateful to her. And I want to talk about it because maybe there's some people listening that have experienced this. And I want to talk about how extremely painful it would be because I've had a lot of clients who've experienced this. So one of the things that my grandmother used to do to my mother was she would give her the silent treatment. So being a young child and your mother refusing to acknowledge your existence,
Mm.
like I cannot even imagine. And again, this was the thing that my mother declared she would never do to her children, and she never did. She never did. So that's
Yeah.
strength. There's real strength there, and there's real healing that she did pass on to the next generation. There were sadly other pieces that she wasn't able to overcome.
Hmm.
But at the same time, she did that. And I really believe that protected myself and my sister, especially, and my brothers too. But just know that if you did experience that in your childhood, if you experience that, know that really is a deep, deep pain, and recognize that that's an area that you can really have a lot of self-compassion for and really work through. Is that it probably brought into question your actual existence, not just your value and your worth, but your existence. And that would be a very, very scary place. And I've known people
Yeah.
whose mother wouldn't speak to them for a few hours. I've known people whose mother wouldn't speak to them for days in a row when they were
Mm.
very, very young. And again, like I can't fathom that pain. Thanks to my mom, again. So that was, she had good intentions. There's no doubt that my mother had good intentions, and yet she struggled. So, and it's not her fault. She does have some mental illness and whatnot, and so that's
Hmm.
part of the situation there too. So again, and that was a big lifting of my. That was a big piece of my healing too. Was recognizing that what
Yeah.
my mom did, she wasn't doing any of it on purpose.
Right.
And so in that case, like, it wasn't my fault. It really wasn't about me. It was about the illness. And so it wasn't really even about her either. And so that's a really important piece of just being able to see, like you said, like, you feel bad for your parents. What did they
Hmm.
get, right? What were they missing out on? And that can really free us again from feeling like it has anything to do with our value and worth, because it just doesn't. It doesn't.
Yeah.
There was no internet. There were not these amazing parenting books. There were one or two parenting books,
It's
that were out there that
true.
were good, but they were hard to find, hard to come by, and
And we
so
didn't have access to, or they didn't have the access that they did to the internet, not just the internet and books, but social media, to be able to connect with another human being who has the tools and the resources so that you
yeah,
could create a, a container or of some sort of program to actually learn these
yeah.
strategies and these tools. That
And
just
I think
wasn't available.
yeah. And another really important thing to note, here I am as a psychology student, like, psychology is a brand new science, really, compared to the other
Right.
sciences. It's only been
Yeah.
around for just over a century. Right.
Yeah.
And so, the things that they had to, like, the parenting, a lot of the parenting advice were coming from things that were done to rats and to dogs, like B.F.
Yeah.
Skinner and different people, right, where they're testing them and they're ringing the bells and
So
running through
true.
mazes, and the dogs are drooling and they're getting shocked, and this is like where we got this, reward and punishment parenting from, which looks like it works. Yes, it works in the animal part of our brain, but it does not work for the
Yeah.
prefrontal cortex, for our thinking, for our, functioning as a human being. It doesn't
Mm.
create health for a being with these other
Yeah.
parts of a brain.
So true. I never made that connection. Oh my gosh. That's so true
Yeah.
of where this comes from. You learn it in science class or wherever,
Yes.
and you don't realize how that's infused into relationships. I don't even want to just say parent, but I think in ways it's infused in relationships.
100%.
You know, it's infused into all relationships, your siblings, your spouses, in some way. You know, it's a very conscious practice to be able to let go of these kind of habits or beliefs that we carry.
Yeah, that we're swimming in our whole society, right? It's how
Yeah.
classrooms function, right?
Yes.
It's just it's the way of the world. And
Mm,
sadly, it's not the healthiest
yeah.
nor the most effective. You know, like we
Yeah.
talked about using that strengths tool with our kids, you know, how
Yeah.
different, how it just naturally changes their behavior. Why in the world would a 3-year-old ever drag a chair over to the kitchen sink and say, you know, I'm going to help whenever you're sick, and right now I'm going to wash the dishes? You know, that to me was completely mind blowing. And that was just the first of many, many behaviors that just changed on the spot. So sometimes the
Mm,
strengths tool, you need to, you know, use it over a matter of days or weeks before it really
of
sinks
course.
into that child and they make it a part of their identity. But there are some times when you use the strengths tool and the change is immediate, because kids' brains are so ready for change and so ready for new mental pathways, right? They've got all that gray matter in there, and it's really the perfect time, you know, to do that. But the other thing that strengths tool does is it creates this unshakable bond between you and your child, because you are that person that you're supposed to be, right? That sees who they really are, that sees the
Mm,
best in them, that draws the best out. So, you know, for anybody who's listening and that says like, it's too late for me, I have my child's a teenager, they're so distant, or my child's even all grown, they're so distant. It's not too late. I've had clients with teenage children, with adult children, and the first thing I get them to do is start using that strengths tool. Start pointing out
mm,
all of the strengths that are present in your
yeah.
child and let them know this is who you are. This is who you
Oh,
are. And when you become that person, and it's not your opinion, right? These are facts that you're sharing with your child, right? That you're like the mirror. That's it. You're just reflecting them.
yeah.
But
Thank you for saying
when
that.
you do that, you know, yeah, that connection can come right back. Gosh, wouldn't I love it if my parents could start using these tools?
I was gonna say too,
What
like
do you
in
thought
ways, like it has, especially after learning this tool, integrating it in your own parenting. Did you see any changes with your relationship with your parents?
Sadly, no.
No.
No,
Mm,
just I learned how to hold boundaries and not
mm,
be a part of the toxicity. You know, we
yeah.
went to a family event. I went to a family event with my husband, and we were driving home, and I just said to him, it's going to take me about 3 or 4 days to recover from this emotionally. And at
Hmm.
that point, I realized, oh, this is an emotional hangover from being around toxic
Oh,
people. You know,
oh
emotional
my
hangover.
gosh.
Yeah. And then it hit me
Yeah.
like a ton of bricks when he said, "Me too." And I thought,
Mm,
oh, I thought this was just affecting me because I grew up with these people, but it's going to
hmm.
affect you for days. That means it's affecting our daughters who are sitting in the back seat, and we can't continue to expose them to this until, you know, until there's some help that my family gets, because they need help. They have pretty much the same pain that I do, you know, and they're
Yeah.
still swimming in it. They're still living in it, and my heart is broken for them. But
Yeah.
they don't. They have to get to a place where they can actually start to love themselves on a
Mm,
different level, and to see and accept who they are on a different level, because right now they're in survival mode.
yeah.
And I could try to swim out in the riptide and save them, but sadly they don't want to come into the shore. They want to stay where they
Mm,
are. That's where they feel safest right now in their lives.
yeah.
And so when they're ready to come to the shore, I'm right here waiting for them. I'm cheering them
Yeah.
on, you know, but for me to go out there, I'll just get stuck in the riptide too.
Yeah.
And
And
that's,
then,
I don't want to live there anymore. I don't want to live in survival mode anymore. So if there are people that don't want to come to the shore, I can't swim out
yeah.
there. I tried for like 35 years to swim out there, Ashley, and to try to say, hey, I think there's a better place over here,
Yeah.
you know. And I just realized that it was taking me under, and I just couldn't anymore. I needed to choose. Really, I had to choose between being a good daughter and a good wife and mother, because I couldn't do all three.
Yeah.
I
And
had to. I had to.
isn't that a choice that often we have to make, right? You know, what kind
Heartbreakingly,
of,
yes.
yeah, unfortunate. Of course, it's unfortunate. Um, there are those tough challenges. How do you, or how have you continued to have those boundaries? And I mean, because I imagine too, right? Like, there's also your daughters, your children, who, you know, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but like are missing this like grandparent relationship, and I don't know if they have that at all.
Yeah, well, I think, you know, you have to look at like what's the quality of that relationship.
Yeah,
You know, it's the heartbreak I've had to live with my whole life,
yeah, that's true.
is that I never felt like I really had a family
Mm,
that loved me or shared with me that I was a valuable, worthwhile human being. And they still continue to speak to me in that way. When I have contact
Yeah,
with them, they still continue to speak to me in that way. And it's heartbreaking. It's
for
truly,
sure.
truly heartbreaking. And I can't save them. I wish I could. I can't. And so
Yeah.
to expose my children to that treatment. So to seeing me treated that way, that's so unhealthy for them to see their mother
Mm,
treated that way. And
yeah.
so, I mean, one of the ways that we held boundaries was we just moved away. We moved back to where I met my
Mm,
husband, back to where his family is, because his family thankfully doesn't deal with the same mental struggles that people in my family are dealing with. And
yeah.
so they have lots of cousins. They have beautiful grandparents here, and it is heartbreaking,
Of course.
to not have those pieces in place. They're pieces
Yeah.
that of the puzzle of my life that I feel like are missing. And there's been a lot of grieving, and I'll just share that too for anybody that's listening that's really
Yeah.
struggling with family or having to be away from family because it's just not healthy. You want it to be healthy. I know you do,
Of course.
right? But just wait on the shore for them, because my sister went to therapy. She swam out of the riptide. She's not in there
Yeah.
anymore, and I do really hope and wish for the rest of my family that they'll be able to do that too. And I'll be waiting
Yeah.
for them. I'm just here waiting for them. I
Mm,
am. I still love them. I love
of
them to pieces, and
course.
I love them enough to not let them continue to hurt me. And
Mm,
that's a beautiful boundary right there.
yeah, that really is. I mean, you clearly have such a strength in setting boundaries, and in just
Mm,
so many different examples that you've provided throughout parenting with your own parents. Yeah, you're just a beautiful example of setting
oh,
boundaries
thank
in
you.
such a graceful way.
Oh, thank you, Ashley Ann. That means a lot to me.
Of course, of course. It seems like, boundaries is such a big piece of, this puzzle that also reinstills too how much, love, self-love. That's what I see as, setting boundaries is it's self-trust. It's self-love to have these boundaries in place. And yeah, there are sometimes going to be these tough decisions that we have to make. But we have to look at too of the responsibility that we all play for each other. We have a responsibility to ourselves. We
Yes.
have responsibilities to other people in our lives, and vice versa. Those people in our lives have a responsibility to themselves, and they
Yes.
also have a responsibility to us as well. Um, and and it's not in any way, shape, or form though our responsibility to fix anyone,
No.
or do
Or
that, or
control
try and
them,
for
or yeah.
yeah, like we can't do
Yeah.
that. We can only control ourselves.
Yeah.
What we do, what we think, what we believe, like we have the control over that. We can't control it for anyone else.
No.
um and sometimes it's like hearing that again. It's nothing new, but hearing that and remembering that is important to like let that go. If there is that piece in relationships where it just feels so challenging, you know
Yeah.
sometimes we
Yeah.
do all the best
Exactly.
that we can.
Yeah. And like you say, like that's part of allowing them and giving them space to be themselves and to make their own choices about their own lives. It's very respectful, actually.
Yes.
Very much so. Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Oh, I'm so grateful. I feel like we unpacked so many
Oh,
beautiful things in this conversation. And before, I always love to end off with this question. So, if you were to kind of like distill your life's journey and wisdom into like one piece of advice, what would that be?
yeah. So it's something that you kind of hit upon just when you were speaking a minute ago. You mentioned self trust. And what I
Mm-hmm.
love to talk about is something that I call unconditional self trust, that we just need
Mm,
to trust ourselves without any conditions attached. Just to know that you know best about you, you know best about your own life. You're capable of making good decisions for yourself. The more you get to know yourself and just accept who you are, the more your authentic self can be in the world. And the more who we really are shows up in the world, the better it is for everybody.
hmm.
You're actually best for everybody else when you're mostly yourself, most like yourself, because you can trust yourself. You can trust your own good intentions. You can be
Yeah.
that safe person for yourself, right? Remember when I said, my favorite quote from Language of Listening is, imagine not having to defend your intentions. The world
Mm,
feels like a much safer place around someone who can see your true intentions. Start to see your own true intentions because they're real and they're good. And like you said, this relationship that we have with our kids,
hmm.
it really is just about loving them and being in relationship with them, right? This is why we have kids. We don't have kids so we have someone to yell at or someone to control, or
No.
that's not why we have kids. So we need to get back to the root and trust the root. Trust your, the time when you were dreaming about getting pregnant and having your own babies, and trust those thoughts, those feelings, those wants, those desires. They're all a reflection of who you are. And there's got to be a way that you can live out your life in a way that you feel proud of. There's got to be. And there is.
Yeah.
There really is. It's just a matter of knowing yourself. And again, having that unconditional self-trust, because nobody else is going to live your life, and you can't live your life for somebody else, or you can't live your life for being somebody else. I can't be that golden child for my parents. I couldn't do that and be a mom and a wife, not a good one.
Yeah.
Right. And those were the roles that it was time for me to take.
And life is long, but it's also short in a way too.
Yes.
And
Yes.
it's way too short to be trying to please, in a sense, these different people like in our lives. And
Yes.
it is 1,000 times more fulfilling when you can come back to that self, that authentic self. And also that grace that you have to give yourself too, because a lot of that too, especially depending on how old you are. I also look at that factor too, right? If you start coming to this place when you are at, let's say 40, well, you've got 40 years of things to take off and unpack and leave behind. Yes. And it's very different as someone in this lifetime. For example, like I use myself, I was 20. So kind of unpacking, not so much compared to someone who's 40. So that compassion for yourself too. But no matter what point you come to this stage where you make this decision for that unconditional self-trust and that unwavering, authentic self to shine through, life becomes easier too in ways.
It sure does. Yeah. Because just making decisions becomes so much easier. And one thing, if you don't mind me using you as an example, Ashley Ann, is like, you were talking about, you realized you were striving so much trying to get that acceptance that you felt you needed from your dad. Did it ever work?
No.
Because it's probably maybe not even what that person is wanting or expecting from us. It's just the survival strategy that we came up with in childhood that either worked sometimes or we hoped would work. And so, I mean, same with me, I tried so hard to get my mom to like me. That was my thing, because I really felt like my mom didn't like me. I thought if she liked me, she'll stop hurting me. So I just got to get her to like me. This is what my child brain came up with. But even in my 30s with 2 babies, I was still trying to get my mom to like me. And then I had that conversation with myself. Oh, hey, you've tried for 35 years. I don't think you're ever going to crack that code. I think it's a moving target on purpose, on purpose, but not conscious for her, like you're never going to get there. And it's because she was trying to protect me. She thought that that's what would keep me safe. Right. But it's not what would keep me safe. It's not accurate. And so I need to figure out what does make me feel safe and what does keep me safe. And one of those things is accepting myself, not trying to get, the acceptance from other people, right? Having that fountain that we talked about. So I can fill that cup up inside of myself rather than from, other people outside of me.
100%. And to that too, I mean, I wrote a book and I published it on my 24th, 23rd birthday or whatever it was. I'm drawing a blank right now in this moment. My dad hasn't even been able to get through the first page of it.
Yeah.
So it also goes to show,
stuff going on, doesn't it? Got stuff going on. Yeah.
And at the same time, now that I think about it in this moment too, it actually doesn't matter to me that he hasn't read it, getting to that place where I was like, I don't care that he hasn't read it, because I've had other ways of being validated of how needed this book was for other people. And also it was just for myself. When I look back at this journey of writing my book, it was like, it was actually more so for me. It was more so for myself than anything. Yeah. Bonus is having conversations with people who really resonated with the words that I wrote. And guess what? It didn't come from my family,
And it would have been nice if it had of. It really would have been nice. And they just can't. For
No,
whatever reason, whatever blocks are there, they just can't move those
of
blocks. And
course.
that's heartbreaking. That's really hard. And like you
Yeah.
said, you're like, if I can't get my needs met in this way, I
Mm-hmm.
am going to go and get them met where they're going to be met. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's true too. That's true too, because I also look at, I have a beautiful relationship with my stepdad, and they're different relationships. I would never compare the two. I
Mm.
have my dad and I have a whole new relationship, and of course there's so much love, and there's just ways in which that I am seen and heard with my stepdad that I don't receive that from my dad, and
Mm-hmm.
vice versa too, and also with my mom, um and it's all okay, and it's all
Okay.
okay. And we're gonna find those ways of, like you said, our needs being met.
Yes.
That's what we're all
Yep.
trying to do. That's what we're
Yep.
all trying to do.
Yeah.
So, so before we fully close, I'd love for you to just share too, where can people follow you, especially if they want to learn more, maybe even dive into learning more from you of this model that you shared with us too. I'd love for you to share more.
Yeah, yeah. So I have a 12-week program where I work with people one-on-one, just privately. So we meet over Zoom. And I do teach you how to use the tools with your children and how to use the tools with yourself. And it's just such a beautiful kind of weaving together of those two realities in your life, so that you really can show up as your authentic self and feel proud of the decisions you make and have decisions feel easy, and really start to connect with that unconditional self-trust that I talk about. And it's all really as simple as the tools that I've been sharing. This is one of the real gifts of the lady that came up with Language of Listening, Sandra Blackard. Like she just has this ability to distill things down to the very smallest,
Mm.
simplest, kind of ways of doing things. So there's nothing really overly complicated about it. And if people are interested in working with me, I do offer a free 45-minute consultation call that you can book through my website. So my website is lovethewayouparent.com. You can
Love
email
it.
me at lovethewayouparent@gmail.com. You can find me on Instagram at lovethewayouparent with dots in between each of the words. You can look up Rosemary Clark on Facebook. I've got kind of this little orangish melon kind of colored sweater on and my hair like this, and, for sure, follow me, friend me on Facebook, whatever. And just, you can just kind of go in there and binge on the posts and just see if it feels like, yeah, this is the kind of stuff that I want to invest in. Because for me, like, gosh, I really just thought it was going to help me with parenting. My husband's a therapist, and he will tell you our marriage is better as a result of Language of Listening. Being able to work with other people. I use the tools with my clients, for goodness sake. This is how I function as a parenting coach, as I use the tools with my clients, and again, using the tools with myself to reparent myself. So it really is a way of, I think, understanding how humans work, and really getting in there to that beautiful kind of self-acceptance, unconditional self-trust, which you then are able to pass on to your kids. Who doesn't want their
Yeah.
kids to really, and this is not a like high in yourself, conceited kind of a self-trust at all. This is a really seeing the value in all human beings, which really is, a big piece of what struck me about Language of Listening, is it really just freed me up to see the value in myself, which freed me up to see the value in everybody. And so the way that I relate with people just feels more like me, and it feels much freer.
Oh, isn't that beautiful? Oh my gosh. I am so deeply grateful for this conversation, for diving in.
Thank you. Me too.
And yeah, these tools, I feel like I am being sent, and the people that are going to support me in this next phase of life in my own journey. So I feel like this is all very guided divinely in ways. So I thank you so much for sharing all that you did, and for being in conversation with me today.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Ashley.
Thank you for listening. Make sure to leave a review and continue the conversation with me over on social media, and we'll see you in the next episode.